It's 10 o'clock Pacific, bright and early here in California. And I got my good friend, Ramona Maxwell, here. We met each other, man, almost 10 years ago. I think we were starting this East Bay SharePoint user group. We met up at a Starbucks near Patrol Hill, and now I am in the neighborhood. So, welcome, Ramona. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So, we're here to talk about this automating growth. And I know you've been very involved with the enterprise space, and now the AI has blown up the past, 18, 24 months. And also you wrote a really awesome book, Microsoft, I call it Azure, uh, the Azure Arc Management. And we talked a little bit before the show how to benefit even like these startups or smaller ecosystem and still be able to reap the benefits of the all the lessons learned from the enterprises. So very excited to have you and to be talking about this topic.
Well, thanks, Ken. Me too. So, if we take a look at our first slide, Jenny, we're talking about strategies for growth for businesses that are aspirational. You know, maybe they're not a huge enterprise yet, but they're assessing their current infrastructure and identifying the needs that they have in preparation for growth. And, AI is the hot word. Everyone is very curious as to how they can use it to accelerate their business. And another strategy that is really key to making a success of that is the ability to continuously monitor the outcome of the efforts you make and then iterate on improvements so that it becomes more and more effective and powerful in your behalf. And on the next slide, we can take a look at some of the challenges that people encounter when it's in a rapid growth trajectory. People often are just very focused on sales, they're very focused on customers. They may have multiple business objectives and they're trying to align with the one that's most profitable. But in that flurry of activity, they can accumulate technical debt. They can begin to have operational problems that actually can assert negative pressure on their growth and begin to threaten the health of the business. So we can talk a little bit about some strategies to prevent that. Jenny, can we go to the next slide? And here's where we can kind of get into a little bit of discussion as to how those issues can be proactively addressed. And Ken, feel free to pop in with questions or thoughts that you have at any time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, one of the first things that a business needs to keep in mind is that the business model comes first before the technology model. And so to effectively use any kind of technology, you must know your own business model very well, and then you have to govern your technology stack so that it stays aligned with what your business objectives are. So in today's climate, there are many regulations that even small businesses are heavily impacted by. They might have compliance requirements. They might vary by geography. For instance, you might be required, if you're operating multinationally, to segregate your data by the location in which you're doing business. You might have application workloads that don't live just on one cloud. They might live in your private data center. Many financial institutions still prefer to keep some of their assets in house because they have established security controls, and validating that an external provider is going to have the same level of security is a laborious process. And then another challenge is that no longer can companies count on flying under the radar when it comes to security. Instead, because the threats are automated, they tend to impact all sizes of businesses, large and small. And so there's risk is not limited by size or by the value of your target. And then finally, another risk that many companies faced is reputation and loss of income due to a
Mm.
human firewall. When you must rely on individuals to keep the confidentiality of your IT systems, of your trade secrets during the period of time that you're growing. And not everyone is suited for the fast pace of life in a startup. And so there can be conflicts that lead to internal threats. And so you really need to look at the human side of the business that you're running also in order to promote a good culture that will keep your company safe. So in the right hand column, we can look at the ways in a practical sense that we can address each of these problems. Like, for instance, if the corporate assets are well known and there are policies set in place in advance as to how they can be utilized, that enhances security and compliance. And the outflow of that is a centralized catalog of resources. And that product that you mentioned that I wrote about, that's really the purpose of that, is to be able to have a
Mm.
consolidated view of all of your resources wherever they live, whether they live on the Microsoft Cloud or GCP or AWS or your own data center. It's really important to know what you have and be able to govern it. And so another aspect when people do decide to use cloud computing to accelerate their business is that the cloud operates on a shared responsibility model in terms of security. So they're expecting you to use their tools in the way that they are guiding you to do so. And if you don't implement them according to the protocols they've set out, then that's considered a failure of your responsibility as the
Mm.
consumer and the business owner. And they're not going to take responsibility for that portion of it. So there's still really a need to have a skilled approach in terms of cloud adoption. And
Mhm.
the really effective way to do that is to have policies and user access controls RBAC that are well set up. And there are advanced features available for that today. For instance, you don't have to just say, okay, you have permission to this whole space. Instead, you can say, you have permission to this task for this period of time
Mhm.
and time box it. And then you can control the outflow of a certain task. Maybe you don't want the draft copies that don't align with what your final result is to remain, archived, because they could later bounce back and cause problems. And so
Yeah.
being able to set the retention for everything from email to documents to even recorded conversations such as the one we're having right now is very important.
Wow. It's funny, Ramona. I was driving on 101 and I saw this big billboard saying zero trust. I say, wow, this is good marital advice. But it was a security company. So talking about zero trust.
Yeah.
And then this CrowdStrike incident, a couple months ago, kind of remind me of that. I jokes aside, bad jokes aside, I have one question. So you have worked with big enterprises with, massive IT setups. So what's one trick or practice from the world that startups can really benefit and scale smarter and faster?
Well, there's more than one. Can we look at the next slide too?
Okay.
Yeah, let's move forward a little bit. So as as a smaller company is starting out, they need to benefit from the fact that large cloud companies start out trialing their products on huge customers. And Microsoft, in particular, is very attentive to the feedback they get from these corporate customers. And so when these things are first released, a startup could easily get into an awkward situation where they were over provisioning tech and it wasn't
Mm.
really helping them, it was actually hurting their velocity. And so one of the best advices you can take when you're first getting established is use proven templates. Like, for instance, if you're onboarding to the cloud, there are foundational templates for almost every type of business that you can use and you can duplicate. And further, because they are ARM templates and can be deployed instantly, you can trim them down. If there's aspects that you don't intend to use, you can just trim those parts off, and yet you can still have a very solid beginning by following the established good practices. And a couple examples of how new things can be wonderful, but yet be kind of risky for a startup. Had Ignite, and I personally attended VS Live in beautiful Orlando. And they were talking about the release of instantaneously being able to spin up a SQL Server instance inside of Microsoft Fabric, which for the data analysts and the developers, that is a moment. Everybody's really excited about that. But in
Yeah.
asking about the governance controls that were possible, because normally if you published a developer pipeline and you allowed them to self-provision services, you would also be able to institute policies that said, well, yes, but you can only buy this much storage per month. You can't, buy the whole farm without, having some governance over that. And you'd have
Hmm.
controls around it. Well, this new product isn't ready for those types of automated controls just yet, to where you can say to the developer, through policy, you can only have 4 instances per dev. But you know that it will be, because that's how Microsoft does things. And so, when something's in public preview or very new, that might not be the best product for a startup. Another example of that is around Azure Arc, and the way that Arc functions to control things on other clouds is by having machine agents installed. And those machine agents help you accomplish things like automatic updates, and they make sure that you're able to see whether your various, Kubernetes instances and so forth are in compliance with the policies that you've set for those applications, those workloads. And so they've simplified the ability to have these agents connect to various Microsoft services by developing
Hmm.
a gateway. But
Okay.
the caveat, because the gateway is new and in public preview, is that if you're using secure transmission on the Microsoft backbone, say with private link or express route, you can't yet use those with the gateway. And so when you see something new like this that you're very excited about, it's good to have caution and only
Hmm.
utilize the amount of technology that you can actually see a payback from. And the one exception to that is if there's anything that you're going to overbuy, it would be security, because
Hmm.
of the threats that face all businesses, to use Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which will cover all of these different spaces, including some of your assets on other clouds, is more of a requirement than some of the other things that might have shinier bells and whistles. And we'll talk a little bit about the how and the feedback loop from that. And so
Okay.
when you do utilize those tools, we're talking about leveraging AI indirectly through public clouds. And
Hmm.
you're doing that when you purchase these products, because Microsoft is already embedding the knowledge gained by running internal models on their algorithms for security. And they have one of the largest surfaces to protect in the world. They have their own internal assets to protect, as well as
Hmm.
very large clients. And so their experience and the data that they're able to draw on in terms of resisting the various threats is very broad. And so
Okay.
that's why the second bullet point here is rely on vetted cloud models for routine business activities. Rather than reinvent the wheel and say, well, I can snag this open source thing over here and then kind of try to cobble it together with my, pick. There's kind of a balance, because cost is very important to smaller and newer businesses, but there's a term in agile software development, weighted shortest job first, meaning that you want to take the thing that you have the most direct route to, you can accomplish most quickly, but that has the greatest impact on your key business objectives. And so
Mm.
that's how you want to build your cloud. Build what you really need. What's your first interest? Is collaboration the top thing that you need to facilitate? Well, then maybe you don't need Azure Cloud yet. Maybe you just want the 365 cloud so that you've got people working together, or Zen Business. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. Then when it comes to AI, when you do start doing to function with, artificial intelligence, you first have to have data underlying it. And the most valuable models, I believe, that are going to be those that are generated internally. So, for instance, if you have a data with your business records, that's going to be very relevant to you, or competitors in your industry. Perhaps you're purchasing data feeds. That's really common in fintech, that there'll be a whole collection of internal data feeds that are being purchased and then analyzed in order to compare metrics from the internal business to the industry as a whole. And so when you have these internal models, you really have to view them like, gold. Like, they are very valuable to your company, but you also have to look at the models that you're designing on top of them and make sure that they stay clean and effective as well as secure,
Okay.
because there's such a thing as model degradation. If you're running queries against the same model over and over, building new models on top of new models, you need the skill set to use AI effectively. And if you don't have that, then you need to
Mm.
go back to the first bullet point and leverage the ready-made products that are available within a secure cloud environment.
Wow. So we got a question coming in. Also
Yes.
want to do a quick time check. We're 17 minutes in. We're doing well. So the question was from Ashley, what metrics should we track to measure the success of the AI integration and scaling, which is, basically what we just went over.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's a really good question, because if you want to gauge the effectiveness of a model, again, it goes back to knowing your business model. So let's say your company has relied on a certain metric for years and you know what it is and you know how to find it manually. Then when you start to use machine learning to, do some of your analysis and maybe get more data and more output in less time, you still need to know what your checkpoints are so that you can
Mm.
do validation of your model, make sure it's accurate and that you're getting the right data returned. And if not, that's when you'll need to investigate and discover why.
Mm.
Is it pulling from the wrong data store? Is it not pulling from enough data stores? There has to be an error somewhere if you can't validate on known aspects of your business. So,
Wow.
and then the last
Yeah.
point is just that people will always work around what doesn't work. And so that kind of goes to the question also, because if they don't feel that the data that they're being presented to do their workflow is accurate and reliable,
Mm.
then they'll tend to go back to the Excel spreadsheet that has been,
Yeah.
on the drive. And so if you want it to be trustworthy, you very much have to have that circular feedback loop of testing and information.
Yeah. That's such a good point, Ramona. This term shadow IT, which I think I was president of the shadow IT at a different firm in my previous life. Is that, well, it wasn't working. All this enterprise stuff just wasn't really doing it for me. So I have a whole stack of using Notion and Airtable, and it wasn't really good best practices on security gesture.
Right. If you have a shadow IT organization, you've already let your business out of the gate, so to speak.
Yeah.
Really, first things first is providing for the people who are providing
Hmm.
the success of your business. Make sure
Yeah.
that they're. I gave another presentation on that and about policy. Actually, it's one of the Springer Link videos I did, and
Uh-huh.
it shows a fellow on the shop floor, and what he's managing with the help of AI is not only all of the people, but all of the machines and all of the different
Mm.
things in the industry where he's producing things. And so if he's getting bad data back, then
Mm.
you're not enabling him to do his job. Or if the policies that are in place are not allowing him to regulate what he needs to regulate, from the temperature, the operating temperature of something, to who should,
Hmm.
you know, you've got to be sure that your policies both protect and facilitate. And for that reason, they need to be tested. Policy development needs to happen through a software development pipeline so that it can be tested like any other control that you have.
Mm. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah.
There we go. So, this isn't just in regards to AI, but in regards to the entire technology stack that a growing business saddles themselves with, that they should start with the minimum investment and then base their future purchases on the returns. Because if you create a good feedback loop, you'll be able to start to see which things are really facilitating your workflows and which things are perhaps accessory products, And outside of that discussion are non negotiable security products that every business should have, like, for instance, appropriate firewalls depending upon the type of application, key vaults to store secrets in. All of those things are not what is part of this discussion. Those are foundational. But when you build beyond that foundation, then you do have a choice how much AI you're going to consume and whether the model that's commercially available is something that's even applicable to your business, or whether you would benefit from having, more of an internal industry focus. And what do you expect it to output in terms of acceleration? And like any other business decision, you're coming down to the numbers on that. How much money do you
Hmm.
expect it to return if you're paying this for it? And so, the thought is that there are very likely case studies that you could examine with your industry. And whether you're a client of Microsoft or another cloud, if you have a technical account manager, they're going to be able to provide more information to you than what you would perhaps read publicly on the web, and be able to really give you some insight as to what they've seen work and not work for a business of your size. And you also have to take into account external factors because, like, for instance, many big companies were greatly affected, especially if they were anywhere in the real estate industry, when the interest rates changed. And so they might have been flowing along at a pace where their cloud spend was really big. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden, they need to make an adjustment and pull back. And so in forecasting, AI can help, but it's not necessarily going to cover every situation, because circumstances change. So, you're assuring that the things that you're looking at are relevant to the work that you do, and you're trying to make your best guess, as to what will be the most effective. But it's better to protect yourself by not overextending during a period of growth in terms of technology, because every space that you extend into, people are still needed. You still need to get the right level of expertise to run these things, or they won't really provide the benefit you expect.
Hmm.
And that leads to the next point, which is assuring that your organization's data is managed. If anything, the introduction of artificial intelligence into daily life has made data professionals even more vital, because someone has to understand what that data is that's underlying your model. And if it's correct, and if it is current and fresh, and if it is, you know, as the last point brings out, corrupted, duplicated, unversioned, inauspicious data leads to models that are racist, rude, inaccurate, and useless. You know,
Wow.
so
The hardcore truths.
so love your data professionals, and probably if
Hmm.
you're layering in skills in your organization, data is going to provide the most return, having really experienced data scientists
Hmm.
to help you build
Wow.
these things and custom fit your AI to what your business use case is.
So, Ramona, this is really, really good. I've got a quick thought. So,
Yeah.
costs tend to skyrocket when the startups get product market fit, when they're maturing, when they're scaling. How can they use tools like, Azure Arc or anything similar to get better visibility and cut waste, which is basically, what this slide is about?
Yes. Yes. And let's look at the next slide too as we would look ahead, Jenny. And it's very important, if you're going to manage something, you need to know what it is. And that's why this slide sets out saying feedback loops aren't just for agile dev. So the purpose of a product like Arc, but there are others too,
Mm-hmm.
clouds, and there's smaller ways to approach it. I would say the free version of ARC is invaluable when you're starting out, and then grow as is needed for your business. But
Hmm.
there's two aspects to it. One is that many organizations need, they end up paying for development efforts that weren't finished, you know, partial apps, things that they've forgotten about. And there are companies that completely make their living just by saying, let me audit your cloud environment and give me 10% of what I save you. And they save them a lot of money and they make a lot of money because, you know, it's a big place and companies are busy. And so it's really easy to have these things spiral out of control. And
Hmm.
so you want to discover those forgotten assets, but you also want to be proactive about it. You want to set a life cycle for your content. And sometimes how your content is life cycled is directly tied to compliance regulations. It would depend on what type of industry you're in, on what timetable you could sunset things and be rid of them. But you know, when it comes to applications, they're going to change as your business changes.
Hmm.
So, how many old versions of code, for instance, are you keeping and where are they? And do you have a consolidated code pipeline? Do you have a consolidated infrastructure pipeline, infrastructure as code? You know, and that's especially important when deploying to the cloud. If you want to stick with a template, then you need to govern how you deploy to the cloud. And if you follow those things and automate as much as possible and govern by policy, the way that Azure, for instance, is structured, there it can inherit policies from the very top, which are management groups, which extremely large companies can use to manage multiple subsidiaries, you know, in different parts of the world. And then it gets down to the more granular things like subscriptions, you know, which you might assign a subscription just to a department, and then down to even smaller things like resource groups. You need to be aware of how, let's say, if you had a policy at the very root management group, and you would probably not to have want to have more than like one there, because what
Hmm.
you do there is going to affect everything beneath it. So, like, let's say you have a company standard that all data must be encrypted. Well, that might be the type of policy that you could put at the root. But generally speaking, you're going to go down and you're going to look at the business needs for a certain area. And there's another product that makes it easy for um, to even be able to look at multiple tenancies. It's called Lighthouse that Microsoft has. So governance and administration are just becoming, you know, a key objective. And if you build them in from the very beginning, if you bake them in so that they can't be circumvented, then you'll have a consistency to your
Hmm.
growth pattern. You know that you'll be safe as you grow, and you'll feel confident to expand because you know that you've already established a working pattern. And so
Hmm.
if you see a new business area that you can reach out into, it's a simple matter of duplicating things that already work instead of trying to build from scratch each time.
Wow. Well, uh, that is so many to so much to unpack
Yes.
there, Ramona. Yeah, I think we just really scratch the surface to a huge need out there. There's a lot of things that we're unlocking here. So to we cover a lot of grounds. We were to sum it up. What's the one enterprise discipline that startups could really adopt to stay efficient as they grow? I mean, this is kind of like the crux of the problem we're trying to crack today.
I would say it's governance because, you know, governance has to be a living effort, and it has to start at the C suite. It has to start there, and
Mm,
there have to be corporate objectives that governance aligns to.
okay.
And IT running the business is like the tail wagging the dog. It should not work that way. You know, you have to have a lead according to the business model. And then IT is the most powerful partner you have to make
Mm,
all of those dreams come true, so to speak, you know, to
mm,
turn it into action, turn it into something that reaches your customers. And, you know, again, this slide points out that AI is great for those types of scenarios where you want
mm-hmm.
develop market projections, see where should I stretch my business towards next,
Mm,
gauge the effectiveness of the different web applications you have. Are people leaving? Why? Those are the kinds of things that AI can help you answer, and then
mhm,
help you integrate your monitoring and response loops. you know, you and I have both been in tech for a long time, and we've seen this phenomena of alert exhaustion where,
yeah.
some poor person at a terminal has 10,000 alarms coming in a day, and there's no way that they individually would be able to sort through them, and they might miss the one that actually does indicate an intrusion or some problem. And
Mm,
so that's a really good use case for AI to go
mm,
and sort those things. And it's also being used for pharmaceutical development because, they're trying to analyze images and large data sets. And so it's much faster to have a machine loop through those things, even the image processing, than it is to have the human eye try to do that and then, document out exactly what they're seeing. It's better to put the human in the role of supervising the AI and checking the data
mhm.
returned to them.
Yeah, yeah. I think the humans fatigue a little bit easier than an agent, right?
Yes, we do. We tire out. Coffee.
Coffee time. Yeah. Wow, this is so great, Ramona. So first, my first action item is go out to Amazon and get your book. I'm going to read up on the ARC management. I think is a really invaluable tool. Second, you also have your own consultancy. You're doing enterprise architecture, and also you are Microsoft certified trainer, right?
I am. Yes. And I'm offering consulting services simply in pre project consulting because that's where I specialize, is in helping you evaluate what you might need in terms of a large
Mm,
Microsoft partner, which I'm not.
mm.
I'm a small Microsoft partner, and I'm a corporate trainer. And I'm certified at the expert level in Azure infrastructure. I can help you with those sorts of things. Yeah. And I'm
Wow, that's
on another book for A Press, and this one you're going to see previews coming out because I'm going to start publishing after the first of the year a LinkedIn newsletter that will be a preview of a lot of the content on the next book, which is going to discuss more on this topic of AI as I cover the
okay.
Microsoft Copilots. So, and there's a lot.
Wow,
So
that's exciting. What's the best way to get a hold of you, Ramona?
just email pro@fusioncloud.com, and that's fusion with a Z. Yep.
Pro.
Yep. And also,
Okay.
you visit Fusion Cloud, my phone number and so forth is available there.
Okay.
Okay. Or reach out
Excellent.
to me on LinkedIn because I love making good connections, and happy to talk with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the post production, we'll make sure that all of those resources will be under the show notes and under the description, so that people can get a hold of you, get a hold of me, and we'll continue to spread the gospel.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, that's amazing, Ramona. Thank you so much. And let me just scan. I mean, we're pretty much a few minutes over, but I'm going to scan the room, make sure there's no outstanding comments we haven't addressed. We got a couple audience here. I'm just looking at the LinkedIn comments and looking at the rooms. I think we are clear. Yeah. So it sounds like we delivered a good session here, and thank you so much, Ramona. It's so great to rekindle our connection. It's been a while. We need to go to where you are and have that coffee again.
Okay. I'll see you soon. All right.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks for having
Happy holidays, Ramona.
me. Okay. Thank you so much.